calendar. And we have approved minutes from the February 8th, 2024 HWMA Board of Directors meeting.
I had something on it. Hang on just a minute. Just the fact that it was mentioned twice on item 4 that Jill Duffy thanked the board. It says, Jill Duffy thanked the board. She thanked the board. Spoke briefly. I don't know. It's the English major in me, but I thought that was a bit redundant.
Maybe she thanked
She probably thanked us many times, and we thanked her as well.
Director Jones noted, and we'll make the correction on the final.
Thank you.
All right.
With that, I'll move that we accept the minutes of the February 8th, 2024 meeting with that deletion.
I'll second.
All right. We have Director Jones made a motion and Director Castellano second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Motion passes. And now we're on to oral and written communication. Do we have anybody in the public that wishes to make a comment this evening? Anybody on Zoom? All right, I will close oral and written communication and move on to receiving an update on SB 1383 and Organics Processing Facility. Can we have a staff report?
Thank you, Chair Matthews. While the staff report does mention a presentation, this will actually be more of an informal update as the details currently are being worked on and are still in flux. But some of you may have noticed that in reviewing the draft fiscal year 24-25 budget, the organics division and line items are pretty sparse. What that means is that HWMA will not be conducting organics processing operations for the next fiscal year. We were notified by member agency staff last month that the franchise contract negotiations are still ongoing and in flux. And until those can be finalized, unfortunately, the needed infrastructure and trucks cannot be ordered to service those routes. So at this juncture, I don't have an exact date on when we can expect, but I do know in talking with member agency staff that it will not be any time in the next fiscal year. So fiscal year 24-25, the organics facility will remain inoperational. And we will bring more information as we get it from the member agencies and the franchise haulers to this board.
Thank you, and that makes total sense. I'm just curious, I know we had set aside some space to use for that facility. How is it being used now, and how might it be used for the upcoming, this interim period?
So as this board may or not recall, we originally closed the Eureka Recycling Center during the COVID-19 pandemic in September of 2021. It was briefly reopened, and then about a year after that, it was determined that one of the best locations for a quick organics processor in county would be the Eureka Recycling Center because of its area inside the solid waste facility permit that we have for the Hawthorne Street transfer station. So the decision by this board was made to close the Eureka Recycling Center in preparation for organics. We have done a decent amount of work so far in preparation. We had an inkling that we weren't going to be opening July 1 of 2024 around the January time, but we weren't for sure, and we didn't get confirmation from the jurisdictions and the franchise haulers till about a month ago, a little bit more than a month ago. We were in theory on track to open our doors for that. So we've done a lot of maintenance. We've done a lot of work. We've removed a lot of things, the baler being one of them. That was the main processor for the recycling center. We've done some work on the floor. We'll continue to do more sealing and work on the floor and the doors as well. In the future, right now, because of the organics grant, any money that we use to edify the infrastructure there, we cannot put any other activity on. So that kind of holds that space in limbo if we want to continue on the work plan path that our grant spells out. That doesn't mean that we can't use some of the facility that maybe the activity isn't going to take place on. It's not a generally large facility, though. We could not, for say, bring back the Eureka Recycling Center in the space available that won't be utilized by the grant activities. What we can do is, while we're managing the grant, potentially refocus to looking for an area that we can reopen a recycling center for some of the hard to reach areas, hard to dispose of materials. That's something that staff has thought about since hearing this news, but at this point, it's a little early for me to give any firm deadlines or anything like that on something of that nature.
Are we going to get any, is there any penalties that we're going to incur from being so far behind?
HWMA or the jurisdictions?
Both?
So HWMA won't receive any penalties. We've been in contact with our grant manager. We've asked for an extension to this grant. They've been amicable to extending and awarding that grant up to a year after our close of grant. The big thing with the grant is they want to make sure that the money is used for what was intended and that it results in divertible organic tons. And we feel that within a year of the end of the grant, we should be more than able to do that. We actually think it should come online a little bit sooner than that. As for the jurisdictions, again, I can't generally speak for every single jurisdiction. I am in contact with them regularly. We meet almost weekly at this point for SB 1383 related activities. I know that they're going through their caps and their plans, and I believe that they're going to be requesting, if they have not already requested as of today, an extension to their plan as well. So some of the mitigating circumstances are outside of their control, mainly supply issues with franchise trucks.
Thanks. I mean, I talked to Chris Rogers, who is potentially our next assembly member, about this, and he said that not just rural counties are having extreme problem coming into line with this. So all right, does anybody else have any other questions? Any public comment on this? Right? Yeah.
I think your questions answered mine on this penalty. Okay, so I'm good. Thank you.
I did speak with the City of Eureka staff person, Robin Prasker, who's on the Zoom right now, but she was saying that the jurisdictions have been working together to kind of meet with the regulators, and that it seems like permission is going to be granted to delay the process because it's so, one, like all of the jurisdictions are kind of combined in their efforts, and two, it's not uncommon in the state. And and I think things like that little Hoover report is having an impact also in the at the Capitol. So,
Yeah. Do we have any public comment on this agenda item?
Seeing none, Chair.
All right. Well, then let's move on to receive a draft fiscal year 2024-2025 budget. We have a staff report.
Thank you, Chair. So the projected timeline for the 2024-2025 fiscal year begins this evening, with the board receiving the draft budget and providing direction as needed. Staff will then present the draft budget and changes here tonight to the Executive Advisory Committee in the next couple of weeks, with a date yet to be determined. At the board's regularly scheduled meeting in May, the final budget will be presented with all proposed changes and adopted. The following Monday, staff will circulate the adopted resolution and waste management fees to member agencies and franchise haulers. And then finally, it will conclude on July 1st, 2024, where the fiscal year will begin. The key topics that I'll touch on tonight are budget assumptions, including projected revenues and expenditures, waste management fee structure and its adjustments, reserves, personal compensation, and the capital improvement plan and proposed projects. For revenue assumptions are based on a projection of 82,500 tons of solid waste. This is a slight increase to the total projected tonnage from years past, with the Hawthorne Street Transfer Station maintaining 65,000 tons across self-haul and franchise customers. Satellite facilities and the out-of-area self-haul have consistently received more tonnage than generally projected over the last several years. Staff has adjusted these to a comfortable number, with satellite tonnage seeing an increase of 2,000 tons over prior years, and out-of-area self-haul receiving an additional 500 tons. Additional assumptions are grant projects will only utilize awarded funds unless otherwise approved by the board for grants that may need matching funds. Expenses in general are seeing a modest increase based on CPI triggers in operational contracts, a slight increase in overall tonnage, and a proposed COLA for the authority staff. Backhaul projections have not rebounded to historical averages, unfortunately, and have settled to for the better part of 2 years, around 20%. Staff has increased the projected backhauls this year to that level, which is a modest increase of 5% from last year's 15% projections. As you know, the authority undertook a significant change in accounting software and general practices this last year. And while overall staff is extremely happy with those changes, this draft budget continues to refine and expand on those efforts. The majority of line items from last year have remained, and the divisions themselves are the same, but our finance staff has continued to edify our practices and make strides to better reflect how the authority generates its revenue. The countywide fees and base fees see an increase from last year due to the increase in projected tons. Green waste revenue is projected to see a slight decrease from last year because of a reduction in projected tons. The largest overall change year over year is our grant income. With the award of the organics grant, HWMA should see around $960,000 of reimbursed expenditures in the coming fiscal year. Other revenue includes HHW, revenue generated from salvage materials sold, and rental income. One area of note is the timber revenue. In the past, these revenues have been projected and placed here. With current market fluctuations and the margin for error being larger than staff is comfortable with, no timber revenue has been projected for this fiscal year. Staff recommends in the future, when timber harvests do happen, those revenues either be allocated directly to the capital improvement plan, or staff brings those monies forward to the board for proposed projects at that time. Overall revenue is projected to increase just under $15,800,000, an increase of 11% from last year, or right about $1.5 million. Expenditures are set to rise as well, with most of those increases tied to either the addition of projected tons, CPI adjustments found in the contracts, and overall increase in the cost of some goods and services. One notable exception is payroll and related expenses, which will remain largely unchanged should the board approve some of staff's recommendations for staffing levels this evening. Total projected expenditures, again, are $15,800,000 and will result in a projected net income of $0 for the authority for this upcoming fiscal year. The solid waste portion of the waste management fees are made up of 3 distinct components. The first is the countywide program fee, which houses pass-throughs on other county-related programs such as 939 funds, LEA fees, and illegal dumping and cleanup funding, among others. The majority of these fees are set by Humboldt County, or in the case of the Cummings Road Landfill Pledge of Revenue, state regulatory agencies. The household hazardous waste facility is also now fully funded by this portion of this fee and no longer relies on any solid waste subsidies. Next, we have the HWMA base fees, which is responsible for funding all other programs or divisions at the authority outside of solid waste. Over the last several years, there have been a slow transition to reduce the amount of subsidies from the solid waste divisions given to these other divisions and make this fee accurately reflect the true costs of these activities. The long-term funding portion was added by the HWMA board this time last year with the intent of beginning to set aside funding for potential unplanned expenditures related to organics. And finally, we have the facility fee, which houses the costs of the transportation and disposal of solid waste to Dry Creek Landfill, the direct operational cost of handling that waste, indirect expenses related to solid waste, and necessary reserve funding requirements. Staff has completely overhauled the majority of these fees last year to provide better clarity on the overall costs. And again, we have continued to edify that practice this year. Overall, staff is recommending minimal increases to the current waste management fees, with one exception that we'll touch on. Self-haul rates are recommended to be increased to $191.59 a ton, which is an increase of $4.42 per ton, or 2.4%. Franchise rates are recommended to be increased to $172.44 for an increase of $2.03 per ton, or just about 1.2%. Last year, staff developed a new methodology for calculating the franchise and self-haul rates to better reflect their actual costs, and continues to build upon this practice. Additionally, last year, staff also developed new methodology for satellite facilities, with each site representing their true costs. While we believe this process was sound, it revealed an issue with the current solid waste transportation contract that was discovered this year, that revolves directly around the original baseline assumptions of some of the satellite facilities. For Recology Eel River, their current practices are within the margin of error for their original assumptions, and rates are impacted in line with expectations. It is recommended the rate be increased to $145.10, which is an increase of $9.66 per ton, or 7.1%. However, Humboldt Sanitation's rate is currently recommended to increase to $147.86, which is much higher than the rest at $22.10 per ton, or 17%. This increase is due to their current baseline assumptions in the contract no longer matching their general practices. Since the original assumptions for the solid waste contract were developed, Humboldt Sanitation's overall operations have changed, and HWMA staff failed to ensure those assumptions were adjusted in the past. HWMA staff, in concert with Dry Creek, are currently reviewing these issues, and we believe we can come to a resolution prior to the rate finalization due in May. Green waste fees are considered a one-to-one fee for the authority. We simply set the rates at what it costs the authority to have material shipped and processed. Currently, staff time, fuel for the equipment, and other costs are covered by the solid waste fees, as the time dedicated to managing this stream is currently minimal. These are subject to change slightly once the CPIs in the contract are finalized, but staff has projected an increase of about $2.50 to both the direct delivery and drop-off at the Hawthorne Street transfer station.
Is there a typo in that?
That math doesn't work.
In the green waste fee, should it be $194.81?
That is correct. So the correction for under green waste fees, the franchise collector direct delivery for fiscal year 24-25 proposed rate should be $97.30. Yeah, so the one is out of place there. Similar to the green waste, so recycling and processing fees. So similar to the green waste, this is another one-to-one fee for the authority. This fee currently is still under review by staff and is subject to change slightly based on the finalization of the solid waste tipping fees. The rising price is due to the overall decrease in commodity values and the reduction in CRV material that is now being found in the stream. Other increases include cost of goods and overall fuel for transportation of commodities. So this is an expanded view of the waste management fees that make up the authority's solid waste tipping fee. Countywide fees have remained the same outside of the hazardous waste facility, which has increased by around $2.20 per ton, resulting in an overall increase in general operational expenditures. Material accepted at the hazardous waste facility has also increased, but cost of goods necessary to operate has also increased as well. HWMA base fees will see an increase of approximately $3 a ton, with that increase being realized in both the daily operation of the Cummings Road landfill and the continued work relating to safety and stormwater activities by the environmental health and safety staff. The solid waste facility fee for the Hawthorne Street Transfer Station will see a minimal reduction in per ton costs from a reduction in overall indirect costs and needed reserve funding. A significant reduction in staff costs from vacant and proposed frozen positions as well. The satellite facilities are responsible for setting their own operational fees, with the authority providing the per ton cost for transportation and disposal. The authority currently maintains 4 distinct reserve funds. Operating reserves are to ensure available funds for unseen capital needs, economic uncertainties, and cash flow requirements as needed. Based on the target of 15% of operational expenses, the target reserve requires an additional increase of $130,556 this year. To note, this year staff will be examining the original intent of the operating reserve and its current efficacy for the authority. It was originally implemented in 2010 and over time has been commingled with cash on hand that serves as more of a total cash reserve than what the board may have originally intended. Other reserve accounts have been established since then, and the staff feels now is a good time to revisit this particular reserve and propose changes in the coming year. The Capital Improvement Reserve is utilized for the future planned expenses related to capital projects as approved by the board. In November of 2022, the HWMA board earmarked $650,000 of capital improvement funds to be used for unplanned infrastructure upgrades needed for the upcoming organics recycling processing facility. With the award of the Cal Recycle Organics grant, staff proposes to release these funds back into the capital improvement plan. The capital improvement plan structure and makeup was completely revamped to include project descriptions, project funding timelines, and general cleanup that includes distinctly outlined projects late last year. This overhaul included a large portion of projects from the previous plan, with most projects dating back before 2021 that had been deferred, resulting in projected costs that fell short of the needed capital. Staff has pushed those projects from fiscal year 23-24 to the upcoming fiscal year and adjusted their total capital costs as needed. We've reviewed all projects on the current plan and updated all projects as needed, and will continue to regularly check in to ensure capital costs are being covered. The funding level on July 1 of 2024 will be $978,000, with capital projects for 24-25 totaling $920,000. This results in an excess funding for the year of around $60,000. But looking towards the future capital expenditure requirements, staff is recommending adding $130,000 to the fund for fiscal year 24-25 to offset future costs. This will stabilize the impacts to the overall waste management fee, and the $130,000 in additional funding represents only a $2 increase to the proposed waste management fee. And that would bring the total reserve funding at the end of fiscal year 24-25 to $192,000. The rate stabilization and employee health and benefits reserve will be fully funded for this coming fiscal year and are not in need of replenishment. The budget as presented includes a cost of living adjustment for all employees of 4.1%. Historically, COLA increases at the authority have been difficult to determine and loosely tied to either available funding or tip fee thresholds, creating confusion around those increases. Last year, staff made an attempt to tie those proposed increases to actionable items. We took input from this board and member agency staff, and this year we have made revisions to this methodology. In preparation for this year, staff conducted a study of over 20 special districts or public waste management authorities across the state. 18 total entities responded, with 83% of respondents utilizing a CPI to determine wage increases. Additionally, almost all respondents had a max percentage increase, with a clause that banks percentage points over that max in a given year to be incorporated next year. Respondents noted that this was advantageous to both the employee and employer, as it mitigates the potential for large spikes in the CPI for a given year, yet maintains pace with overall inflation. Staff recommends going forward that the HWMA to utilize the Consumer Price Index W West Region annual of the previous year, and proposes a cap of 5% for any given year, with the percentage over the cap to be banked for the following year. Staff believes utilizing the annual average will insulate both the HWMA and the employees from inflation outliers, and maintain HWMA wages in a competitive band with local businesses, and ensure recruitment and retention efforts remain competitive. And as we discussed earlier, with the delay of the organics processing facility, the proposed organizational charts includes freezing 2 additional MDT positions, bringing the total frozen positions to 4. These positions have been vacated by either staff through retirement or other job opportunities and have remained unfilled. At this time, staff does not believe filling them is necessary to the current operational needs of the authority. The additional freeze of these positions results in a savings of approximately $126,000 this year, and for next year, and an overall savings of $240,000 from all 4 frozen positions for this fiscal year. And with that, as always, I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have.
How big a deal is the price of fuel increase affect the operations for the year?
It has the ability to affect it greatly. So our trucks on average from the transfer station, they average around 5 miles per gallon. They travel 400 miles round trip, give or take. That's 70-ish gallons of fuel, depending on the day. The price of fuel and the diesel fuel index is one of the largest factors that we take into consideration on how we budget for the upcoming year. So if we've seen in years past when we've missed or when we've missed on backhauls, the amount of money that the authority can lose in rapid succession. The same thing happens with if we over budget and we don't get to the threshold that we think we are, we have a pretty decent excess of funds. So it's something that we keep track of, but it's also something that HWMA staff, Dry Creek landfill staff, their subcontractor, they've all been doing this for a very, very long time from this exact location. And they've gotten very good at advising the authority on how to project for the ebbs and flows of the diesel fuel index throughout the year.
I think that's all I had.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead? Yeah, go ahead. Okay. I have a few questions. Let's see. The reserve amount, I know we have some interest on here. Is the interest that we have in our budget generated from what we have in reserves?
That is correct.
Okay. That's great. Like to see that happening. And I was just curious with the COLA and the staffing recommendations, do you feel comfortable with having enough staff on hand? Super.
Yes, we do.
Thanks. And then with the wages, it makes sense. I'm just curious if you did any comparison with local, the local workforce and market.
So we did that last year. And what we struggle with at the authority is when we look at our member agencies, a lot of them are governed by collective bargaining agreements or MOUs with unions. That's not something that we have to deal with. So sometimes it's very difficult to tie why jurisdictions are going to be granting COLAs, because they don't tie them directly to things either inside the MOU, and authority staff has to assume or ask staff that was party to those negotiations why. We did a lot of work. Director Heacock did a tremendous amount of work in this study. This was one of his passion projects for the year. The amount of jurisdictions that he contacted was more than I thought necessary. So I appreciate that greatly. And he also really tried to focus on jurisdictions that didn't have all of their staff governed by MOUs. It's very difficult finding one-to-one likes for something like us. But that's something that we ran into last year. We did talk to member agency staff. We did talk to the executive advisory committee. But a lot of their increases are tied to bargaining.
Great. Thank you. And thanks, Director Heacock, for all that work. I remember in the past we've hired fairly expensive consultants to do that work. So appreciate the cost savings there too. I was curious, the education program. In past years, we increased the budget for that. How is that going? Is it having effects in the community? I know we still struggle with things like separation of waste and things like that. So there's certainly a continued need for education.
So I think at the funding level that it's at now and the efforts that are being given, it's tremendous. The consultants that we use are tremendous. We have incredible feedback. We have used several of them for a very long time. Back when I was a programs analyst in 2018, we continue to maintain those relationships, and through this board, we've continued to expand those to different areas. The feedback we get from those consultants and from the schools that they visit and the kids that they talk to is tremendous. So right now, that portion of the education and outreach is awesome. And I think the consultants will always take more funding so that they can reach more ears, so that our reach can be bigger. And that's certainly something that we can look into. But also, we've talked about at length in the past, revving up HWMA's education and outreach. And so I am happy to say that we do have an education and outreach analyst that will be starting next week. So hopefully you're going to start seeing a lot more effort come out of HWMA as well. That's not to say that we're not going to continue to utilize the consultants, because they have an expertise that we would never have at the authority. But I think a concerted effort from both parties is going to result in much needed education about the waste stream itself.
Great. And do you know if that will include kind of outreach at some of the larger community events like Oyster Festival, Friday night markets, things like that?
It will. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, obviously, at this point, what events and when, but that is a major factor. That the authority used to be a much bigger presence at Earth Day with Zero Waste, partnering with Zero Waste for events, partnering with jurisdictions for take-back events. I know the city of Eureka just had a compost giveaway, or it's coming up this weekend, maybe. Those are the type of things that we need to be a part of just as much as the jurisdictions.
Yeah.
If we're going to be tasked with overseeing and helping jurisdictions manage their waste, then we need to be party to as well.
Appreciate that. And then the last question I had is kind of related to the reserve and the operating reserve. And so I'm excited. Firstly, I'm just excited that you're thinking about it and going to bring it back, because it's, of course, as our budget grows, that number also grows. And, I think my question is just kind of related, like, we know that, organics is delayed, but we also know that we're looking at, moving forward with the study to most likely implement it locally. And so I think my question is just like, do you anticipate wanting to, build some reserve towards the specifics, kind of implement, I know we have this big grant, but it's going to be a huge endeavor, like build some reserve specific to the implementation of organics.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think what I also want to work with in concert with Director Schwartz is making our reserves meaningful. So it's one thing to have reserves, but it's one thing to have them vague enough to where the individuals managing them or having oversight call into question exactly what that funding level should be, how they should be used, and how those practices have changed since the adoption of them. So yes, we are going to need reserves. We are going to need to bolster our reserves, but I want to make sure that this board is fully aware of what those threshold levels are, what our recommendations for those threshold levels, and that they make sense. I'm not interested in amassing a massive amount of waste management money, but in general, our field costs a lot of money. And so the sooner that we can prepare, the greater effect that we can have on lessening the impact in a single year to the tip fee. And that, at the end of the day, that's the biggest thing, is we want, at HWMA, we want to make sure that it has the best rate for our ratepayers. And the only way we can do that is to make sure we prepare our reserves properly.
Thank you for all the work on this. My question is about the COLA, the cost of living increase. I was looking up for last year for federal employees. It was 5.2 December 21st, 2023, authorized by the president. And then for this year, it looks like they're looking at only a 2% pay raise. So I'm just curious where you got the figure for the COLA in the budget.
Yeah, so the figure for the COLA is for CPIW. So it's a CPIW, and it's specifically West Region CPIW. And then it's the actual annual average. So you'll see in a lot of our contracts, a certain month is picked. It'll say something like the CPIW 1982 divided by 100 of March the previous year. Staff internally feels that using an annual comparison is better to insulate not only the employees but the HWMA from potential spikes in the year. When you look at CPI over a given year and you look at the months, you can see ebbs and flows in that. And we feel that using the annual from the previous year is a better way to insulate those ebbs and flows from both parties. So that's how we determine that number.
And then my other question has to do with the possibility of Fortuna joining the Humboldt Waste Management Authority. And I was wondering, I was going to ask this during your director's report, but will that, I'm not sure that that will even occur within this fiscal year, but will that affect anything in the budget?
I would say minimally. And the way that it would affect the budget would be an increase of around 6,000 tons to the overall tonnage picture, which would allow us to impart the expenditures over a greater tons, if that makes sense. So right now we have 82,500 tons projected. You would see a slight increase to most of the fees across the board outside of the satellite fees or outside of the facility fees if we added 6,000 tons. It's not going to push the needle by any stretch as far as a reduction in $15 or something like that. It will be minimal. It would be about $1 or $2, give or take. But it's still something that we are actively working on. We met with City of Fortuna staff last month. I met with their general manager or their city manager, and we went over all of these items. And we thought at this time it would be best to see our proposed rates and then be able to compare the proposals that they've gotten from their franchise haulers and their transfer station operator, so that way we can determine what the actual impact of joining the authority for Fortuna would be.
Good, thank you.
So that's great that we hired education and outreach. What about the other positions that are open? There's still the director of operations position open. How's that going? How's the search for that going?
Currently, the director of operations position remains vacant.
Who's doing that job and is along with theirs?
Some of the duties have been split between the operations supervisor and the executive director. Additionally, Director Heacock from Environmental Health and Safety has taken a couple of that on. It is by no means ideal by any stretch. We are very lucky to have the tenure of staff that we have in operations and in solid waste specifically to take some of that burden. But it is still an issue that the authority is actively trying to solve.
Great. And then I know that we had talked about in past budgets about, that a pot of funds for like community cleanups and whatnot. Is that still called out? And
It is in the countywide program fees. It's the illegal dumping and cleanup portion. So for this year, it's budgeted at $54,400.
and is that more like a first come, first serve for the jurisdictions? Or
So this year, I will say in years past, yes, it has been first come, first serve, and the majority of the time it is used by the larger jurisdictions. Although the city of the city of Ferndale and the city of Riodale have used it in the past for larger cleanups as well, mainly off Monument and Wildcat. But one of the goals of the executive director this year is to ensure that we have an understanding of how those funds can be used by all jurisdictions. One of the issues we've had in previous years is a single jurisdiction using the majority of the funds and then no funds being there for other jurisdictions. That's something we want to avoid. In the past, that's generally not a problem that we've had because it was unfunded or it was underutilized for a very long time. And just most recently with some of the illegal dumping issues that we've had locally, that fund has continued to be used completely. So that is something that HWMA staff will be working on this year to ensure there's continuity through all the member agencies to utilize their share of funds.
Wonderful. And lastly, I'd like to thank Director Schwartz. It seems that you have made quite an impact on the fiscal health of HWMA. So is there anything how has it been like a year? How long have you been? 9 months. Well, wow. Congratulations and thank you once again. Is there anything that you want to add?
This has been an excellent learning experience for me, and I've really enjoyed it. And I just look forward to continuing to report to the board on how we do with our budget as we get it in place and start using it, including things like the illegal dumping fund. So
Wonderful. Well, you're very much appreciated. Thank you.
thank you.
Does the board have any further questions? I'll open it up for public comment if there's any. Anyone on Zoom? Okay, so what do you need from us, Director Keller-Heckman? Do you need a motion to accept this, or is this just information?
Oh, I was just going to say, I appreciate that you brought up the illegal dumping reserve, or maybe not, it's not a reserve, but anyway, the set aside. I would love, I'm imagining that the city of Eureka is one of the cities that makes use of that more often than other jurisdictions. And I would love to actually increase that reserve, so that way we can, or that amount, so that other jurisdictions could have it available. But it's, being the more urbanized part of the county, I do think that it's a really valuable resource for citizens of Eureka, but also everyone who comes to Eureka to work and do business. And so I just want to make sure we all have access to that funding.
I'm in favor of that. Thanks. If we can
So-
increase it, yeah.
Traditionally, the fund was set at $40,000, and this board actually raised that amount last year at the fiscal year draft budget. Staff would be more than happy to add additional funds if the board directs as well.
Great. I think the other option would be that, we could kind of see how quickly it's being used and then, revisit it in 6 months, which, whatever the preference of staff is, I think could work.
Staff can bring back a recommendation in May before the budget is finalized at that meeting, and we can bring back two scenarios. It'll be very easy to adjust the tipping fee based off that countywide program fee. So we'll take a look at the usage from the last fiscal year, and then we will return to this board with a recommendation.
Thank you.
That sounds great. Thank you. Any last comments or questions? All right. All right. Well, then let us move on to standing items board report. updates. Anybody have anything to report out?
Just wanted to report that Blue Lake continues to have a waste collection in our corporation yard every other month. We had one in March, so our next one will be in May, and it's very well received. It's limited only to the citizens of Blue Lake, but it is any yard waste. And of course, there's guidelines with that as far as pressure treated wood and that kind of thing. So it's very successful in our city.
Thanks. This is, some folks probably know I'm on the board of Humboldt Transit Authority. I just wanted, just in case these conversations aren't happening, Humboldt Transit Authority is putting in a hydrogen fueling station. So I know that Recology and other, entities are looking at different kinds of vehicles, and I think it would be worthwhile to have conversations if hydrogen fueled vehicles might be able to be purchased that could be fueled there, but purchased for waste removal and waste processing and things like that. Just wanted to I was like, where did I put that? And so I think I put it there. Now you know.
Any other board report outs? Okay, Executive Director report.
So there's only one item, and it is in the very, very early stages. But in January, you had a representative from Zero Waste Humboldt come and speak about a grant that they got for reuse activities. Obviously, HWMA will be working with Zero Humboldt to see how we can reclaim or save potential items disposed at the transfer station to be utilized in their reuse program. So we are still in the very early stages of that. But HWMA would absolutely love to work with Zero Waste Humboldt and their efforts on the reduction and reuse of material.
That's wonderful. All right. Well, if that is all, I will adjourn. Thank you.